So, Peter, I've been thinking about algorithms and permission data. So, the most important thing that blockchains can do is deliver tokens, and those tokens can be used as permission tokens. Right. And when you break down a profile field by field, then you can permission or depermission that. That's going to be important in the basically the privacy arena. So GDPR changed all the rules in Europe around how that works. So now you can be forgotten, the right to be forgotten from databases.
Yes.
So what are the implications for CRNs when that's the new requirement legally?
That'll be interesting. They're going to have to be a much more dynamic relationship with the people who they've got in their database. I assume that when you permission data, you're generally going to understand that that's not forever. So I expect that one of the permissioning processes will be this is for 12 months or 3 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably if you have a contract, say, with a provider, and we'll talk about the identity side of this. So you've permissioned a provider with some information and the contract, so it's a 12-month electricity supply contract.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that permission will be 12 months and 1 day or something like that, or whatever is required to complete the transaction, and that permission would have to be refreshed periodically. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I'm thinking much more than that. I'm looking at that as one of that's a minimum requirement now.
Yeah.
So it's not even a proposition. That has to be so in the legal arena.
Yep.
So business now needs to architect their data and their customer data in a way that they can let go of the customer data very easily, and it can disappear from their system.
Yep.
The systems weren't designed to do that.
I know, that's what I'm thinking. As you're saying that, I'm thinking, good luck getting that 100% in these huge legacy databases, because I suspect some of these data holders don't even know what they've got, let alone how to go through and purge it or check for if it's permissioned. I just think there's going to be no way that people can comply to a high order for quite a while.
So that sets up an interesting problem because the cost of change for business is incredible here.
Yeah.
And the legislation is clear in the European. They're leading the way. Australia here is looking at exactly the same fundamental principles that's actually being proposed at the moment.
Yep.
So the privacy rules are going to be a heavy business cost. They're going to be onerous in the short term.
Yeah.
And most people will be in breach because most of the CRMs or accounting systems were never designed with this in mind at all.
No.
So what that gets to is most of the data is unpermissioned at the moment in the classic privacy sense. So if there is machine learning and algorithms now being built inside business, and business is very interested in AI, they are super willing to take meetings from vendors that are selling AI, but the people who are selling AI, algorithms, machine learning, and the like aren't necessarily talking about the quality of permission data. So they're not talking about what we would call a permissioned algorithm. So that means that there is a huge space in the conversation because permission isn't really understood as an architectural problem.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at the moment is blockchain is the accounting for AI because it can show where the data came from. It can show provenance of data, which means where was the source and basically who generated the data. But much more important than that, once you start layering permissions around that, then who accessed the data?
Yep.
And the tricky ones, who enriched the data?
Yep.
That's really hard.
And the other thing there will be evidence, say, from a data holder that a given piece of data was permissioned. That'll be bundled in to the matter of record so that there is, therefore, some protection provided that the data holder has done the right thing. They'll be able to demonstrate there was because people forget You're prepared to allow us to look at the following pieces of information. Yeah, sure, I just want my power on. 12 months later, they won't remember having done that quite possibly. So it will be in the interest of both parties. But the other thing I just wanted to mention, though, talking about the providers of algorithms, their motivation and their thinking around the whole world of algorithms and AI has nothing to do with this. That's not the primary motivation. Mostly it's about getting the most value by the data holder from the data. So this will be quite a step.
Yeah, and they need a lot of data to train the algorithms properly.
Yeah.
So more data is better.
Yes.
Would be a very simple rule of thumb.
Yes.
And what we're talking about is radically reducing the data sets. So this is going to be a very contentious problem for a long period of time. So if we called old data that people have forgotten, they permissioned grey, and maybe there are other data sources around that have been bought by the business or that have enriched their profile that you didn't know about, we'll also call that grey data. But unpermissioned data is black data.
Yep.
So you having a fresh chance of owning your own profile and permissioning things, well, let's call that white. So there is a real problem with a lot of the algorithms are basically getting grey data at the moment.
Yes.
And that's nobody's fault ultimately. This is a legacy system, legacy reality of the old way that we thought about data.
Yeah.
The new way to think about data is that it is an asset of the person. I should be entitled to my data. What that really means in practical terms is I need to know what I spent my money on, what my browsing history was, what have I actually done online, and what have I done with businesses, and what have I done with government. Now, most of those arrangements, it's my money and it's my data, but they end up holding all the information around how I spent my money and all the information around my choices and my profile.
This is going to change the business model completely of the current players in AI and big data. It really does challenge that business model to the extent that I wonder if that can survive in any real form, because they've had it all for free effectively to date. So their business model is, we will capture and aggregate and triangulate as much data as we can possibly get our hands on, and that becomes our asset base, and we can then use that in various ways to make money. Now, what next when they can't do that anymore?
Well, they're going to have... What this opportunity actually opens up is we have to resolve this. This can't stay unresolved. And data wants to be learned from. So it is effectively... data is knowledge, and then we derive learnings from that. So the algorithms are machine learning. So they're there to learn from the data, the knowledge that we have. So in essence, we need a new structure of the data market that is based on how we share permissions. Who enriched the data is much more important than who owns the data, because that's more clear. Who accesses the data is important. Who benefits from the data? There needs to be a sharing of benefit. Now, we won't know how valuable that data is now. What is more interesting is that across the next 2 or 3 decades, the value of our archives that we build now will be very important to me personally. If I had all the data of everything I did online in the last 10 years, we'll say since 1995, when everybody pretty much got an email, or when social media came on in the early 2000s, everybody set up profiles. I set up my Gmail account in the early 2000s. To have a live feed of all my profile coming from Facebook, coming from Google, coming from my email providers, in plural if they're not those sorts of Google accounts, that should all be going to me, and I should be having a personal archive. That's not really something that's done at the moment. It's a really weird thing that doesn't exist.
Well, if I want to do that, that's really hard to do right now. You would have to put a lot of things in place and maintain a fair amount of rigor to actually be collecting data. but people who do collect data are doing that routinely. So this is going to be very different. But yeah, I agree with you. I would see that as great personal value to be able to go back and do reports on my own behaviour, my spending behaviour, how I'm spending my time. You know, try and work out what are the most effective things I do in my life, what makes me happy, what earns me money. I mean, we've got a rough idea, but we lose sight of these things. They become tacit. They just become part of the background noise, and you can't, it just goes into one big sort of pot of the past that it's really hard to work your way back to, and so you don't.
So the digital future offers us a completely different relationship to our own
huge
behaviour.
Potential.
So algorithms actually offer us a self-learning opportunity.
Yeah.
So Google created the knowledge graph. PageRank was looking at links as votes of validity and popularity. So that's how they organised search engines initially.
Yeah.
It got more complex later.
Yeah.
Facebook developed the social graph. That's what Zuckerberg was really interested in, was working out our connections on a social level. So we had a knowledge graph, and then we had a social graph. What we're proposing here is that permissioned algorithms are related to what we would call a self-knowledge graph.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exist yet. The infrastructure for that isn't there, mainly because the business models and our philosophy of how we look at who owns things around data is really outdated.
Yeah.
So this is a philosophical shift. The algorithms are going to create a new philosophical way of looking at things. And algorithms are indeed philosophy because they are heuristics. They are rules of thumb. They are deriving knowledge. So we do a lot of philosophy in this business.
Yes.
And the architecture of things is very related to philosophically what you're trying to achieve. So interestingly, this whole new algorithm economy will create a philosophical breakthrough.
Implementation of philosophy.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
And it's going to be real and grounded back into incredibly strong details. So true numbers around our behaviour, where we've been, what we've spent our money on, etc.
Yep. Do you see a place in the world, Grant, looking ahead in this scenario, for people who want to completely not be involved? Is there any way a future human being can opt out?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think we all have to play. So what's really important is that we play on terms that are in the interests of each individual. I think that's really, this is this whole thing that I come back to again and again, the inversion of the current model, the assumptions that have sort of insidiously crept into this experiment of democracy, Western democracy, whereby we are getting less and less representation and much more top-down oversight from elected officials, public servants, various agencies and so forth. So this is just very consistent with that whole thing of me wanting to tip the model up and put the individual at the top and acknowledge that leadership needs to have a very different role in the future, or I'm very concerned about where we're heading.
What's interesting for them as individuals is they won't escape the algorithms either.
No.
So, well, they will be getting profiled as much as we are. So there is no difference.
Which is currently not the case.
The leadership and the citizenry, if you like. So they will be subject to scoring about their heart rate, scoring around how stressed they are. There will be algorithms that will be able to see when people are lying.
Now, just to cover that a little bit, we're talking about technologies that are already here.
Yeah.
For example, Xbox, looking at people's pupil dilation, blood supply in the face, those sorts of things, to anticipate the degree of arousal in a game or whatever. And so that's not science fiction by any means. I'm wearing one of those things, which I do deliberately to monitor mainly my sleep, but also how much I walk and those kinds of things. So I've only got a very rough idea of where that data winds up.
So the quantified self's for real.
Yes.
The sensors are here.
They're already here, yeah.
So what we need is a philosophical shift around recognizing that we own our own data is going to be an incredible breakthrough, but how the archives of all our personal data are being treated, and that we're entitled to that. There is going to be a legal revolution around this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, these are the fundamentals that we need to start from, not things that get endlessly compromised along the way of all of the intricacy of setting up legislation, laws, etc., that are convenient to those who are already running the show. They should not be the priority. We should be the priority.
There it is.
Yep.
Beautiful.